Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shaun, and Shaun De Silva, and I'm a consultant at Nolan Business Solutions. I deal with mainly Dynamics GP. So today what we're going to do is we're going to cover invoice approvals. Okay, just a breakdown of what the agenda is going to be and what we're going to cover and things like that. So basically what we're going to go through is an introduction to invoice approvals. So I'll explain to you what the elements of invoice approvals are, how does it work, and after that we'll go through a demonstration and I will show you exactly what how we can set it up and how we can use it within Dynamics GP. And then at the end of the session, if you guys have any questions, you can obviously ask me, or you can forward it to our sales department and we can get answering those as soon as we can. So shall we start with our introduction to invoice approvals? So effectively what the invoice approvals is within Dynamics GP, it's basically an extension that you install within Dynamics GP. So what the invoice approvals actually does is effectively enables you to have an approval workflow structure within Dynamics GP, and it works in conjunction with another piece of software we have from Nolan's called IRRI Quest, which is effectively our purchase requisition web application. So IRRI Quest works with that, whereby users who are external to Dynamics, don't have to be a Dynamics user, can log into IRRI Quest and approve an invoice that's been sent to them. So I'll show you that a bit later. So approval can take place in a hierarchical group workflow, or you can actually send invoice approval to single users. As the invoice is approved by the approver, an email can be sent out to approvers to tell them that they need to approve this invoice, or they have a list of invoices to approve, just as an alert, just to tell them that they need to log into IRRI Quest and approve it. So the email can have a link that takes you directly into IRRI Quest, and the user can just click on the link and go straight to the invoice approval screen and approve the invoice. Within GP, you can see the history of all approved invoices, so you can see who's approved them and when they were approved. Invoice approvals also creates a group of smart lists for approved invoices or rejected invoices or invoices awaiting approval. So you can see visibility on all that and see where in the approval workflow the actual invoice is. You can also print barcodes from invoice approvals within GP. So when I show you in a bit how the screen actually looks, you can print a barcode. Now a barcode is useful if you were to use a scanning some scanning software. You can scan the invoice with a barcode attached to it, and that barcode could be the scanned image could be sent to a specific folder, and using that barcode, the software can pick up that barcode and actually attach that scanned image to the transaction, or link it to the transaction. I won't be showing you that today, but what I'll show you is how you can view the scanned image itself within GP and IRRI Quest. So if you did have something called Kofax Express or other scanning software, you could do the same and show the actual scanned image within Dynamics and or IRRI Quest. Approvers can also update invoice notes, which are then visible in Dynamics GP. So an approver can go and view the invoice within IRRI Quest and click on the invoice notes button, and they can add notes, and then once that invoice is fully approved, users within Dynamics GP can view those notes. So I'll show you that as well. And finally, This is a new feature, so if some of you have actually used invoice approvals before, or seen it, or are currently using it, and you just want to know if there's new features, one of the latest features is invoice accruals. So you could produce an invoice accrual journal for invoices that haven't been approved or haven't been posted at the end of the month or whenever your process is, and it will create a nice journal for you in GP based on those invoice values. Okay, so we'll go through that. So I'm going to jump now to Dynamics GP, and I'm going to show you the individual elements of invoice accruals, and then we'll get going through a demonstration, and actually, so you can see it in action. So once you install the invoice approvals extension within Dynamics, it will reference IRRI Quest. Now, as mentioned before, IRRI Quest is the Nolan's purchasing requisitioning web application, and IRRI Quest directly works with that with invoice approvals, whereas users would log into IRRI Quest and then approve through IRRI Quest effectively. So you don't necessarily have to use IRRI Quest for purchase requisitioning. You could use it simply for invoice approvals on its own to approve the invoices, enabling users who are approvers who are non-Dynamics users or on off-site or on their iPhone or any mobile device can be used for IRRI Quest approvals. Okay, so if I click onto our company setup, this is basically if we are using an invoice accrual, we could set up a default accrual account, and it asks us what do we want the journal distribution reference mask to be as a default. We can change it within the accrual screen, which I'll show you a bit later. And do we want to summarize the accrual journal, or do we want to post it as in the split line? So summarize means it will post one line to the accrual account and split the other side of the transaction. Or if you don't have that text, it will create multiple lines depending on how many invoices you choose to accrue in the accrual screen. So, and another new feature is use net amount. That's if you create approval rules based on invoice amount, the standard option is to use the gross amount. So it checks the gross value. If that's over £1,000, go to X, Y, Z. This option enables you to tell GP to use the net value instead. So if the net value is over £1,000, go to Shaun for approval, that sort of thing. So IRRI Quest GP setup. So this basically just tells us when we send an invoice for approval, where to send it to, where's our IRRI Quest link. So these are the kind of things that just get set up once and you don't need to do it again. So effectively, once an invoice is approved through IRRI Quest, Invoice Approvals says, do we want to move that approved transaction to another batch? The reason we do that is when an invoice is raised and goes for approval, it tells GP to put the invoice on hold. So if you don't move approved invoices to another batch and you try to post that batch with some of the invoices still on hold, it won't allow you to post, and it doesn't actually tell you which invoice is on hold. It just says some documents on hold and you cannot post. So this feature is quite good, as it moves the approved invoices to another batch, and then you could just post the approved batch as a separate thing and leave the original batch still with unapproved invoices in to be approved later. And last but not least, you get the approval rules. So this is where in GP we create the approval rules structure. So this works in sequential order. So effectively we can create as many rules as you want, as complicated as you want to get, but Dynamics GP will run through them in sequential order until it finds the first true approval rule. So by that I mean if it hits the first rule here, and it says finance check greater than £50, and the actual restriction is invoice amount between $50 and that large amount there, 9 million. Then go for approval, and then you say where do we want it to go to approval, and you can say to a specific user, or you can say to a group, and within a group you can have 10 users, so it goes to all 10 of them, and then whoever approves it first approves the invoice. Okay, so that's how the approval rules work. I will come back to this as well once we raise an invoice, and I'll raise one for $50, and then we can see how it works and where it goes. Okay, so once an invoice is submitted for approval, if I switch over to our IRRI Quest application, which I mentioned before. So IRRI Quest is the Nolan Solutions, Business Solutions web application for purchase requests with the invoice approvals element in it. So you go to invoice approvals, and within this screen it would show the list of invoices awaiting approval or the list of invoices that have been approved. Okay, so within the screen the approval will come in, and they can actually go into the invoice, view the invoice details, or they can click on the zoom link on the far right there, and it will show them the scanned image if the invoice was scanned and placed in a specific folder with the voucher reference as the file name. That's how the actual scan image works. So that's something I can get set up. So the zoom is a nice way to see a scanned image if you guys scanned supplier invoices. Okay, so this is IRRI Quest. So we'll come back into this in a bit when we enter an invoice and submit that for approval. So if I jump back to Dynamics GP, so I will raise a purchase transaction. So the bit that's new within GP when you install the Invoice Approvals extension is within the additional menu option at the top, you will now have the invoice IRRI Quest approval, your print barcode, and you can view the scanned image. So if I were to show you the an existing invoice and then go to scanned image, it will show me the scanned image of an existing invoice if we do have a scanned image. If we don't, if it can't find an image, it will just show an error here in the screen saying can't find an image. I can't find the file by that name. Okay, then we have the print barcode, which allows us to, if I print the barcode, we can print a barcode to printer. So this will print the barcode, but if you print it to a label printer, it will print it on the label in landscape kind of format or portrait, depending on how your label has been set up, and you can just stick that on your invoice. And if you did have scanning software that can pick up barcodes and rename the file that is to whatever the barcode says, you could do that. So that's what the barcode is mainly there for. Okay, so if we enter a new invoice, so I'm going to enter a new invoice. I'm going to give it a batch reference of that, and then I'm going to give it a description. So okay, so I'm going to choose just some, so I'm going to choose, type in the usual invoice stuff. So I'm going to start with a low value, so I'm going to say $55 or pounds, because I'm on the fabric cam, so I haven't changed my functional currency to pounds in here. So then you would enter your invoice in the usual way. Nothing changes. If I flick onto the IRRI Quest approval, the additional IRRI Quest approval there, it immediately tells me what my approval workflow is going to be to start with. So it picked up that it's over $50, and therefore it's going to go to the first stage of approval there, and that's fine. So we don't have to click submit or anything from here. It's already saved those details and it's already ready to go. So all we need to do here is click save. So that now has gone to our first approval stage. So if I flick back to the approval rules here and I go to finance, so it fell in between my range. So this approval rule is true. So where it went was, if I check the approval groups, it went to a group called finance check. Now finance check could potentially be someone in finance, in another part of finance, that checks and makes sure that the distribution line is correct and the coding is right and they're happy with it, and then they just hit in approve and it goes to the next level. Okay, so as I mentioned before, it could be a specific person directly, or it could go to a group. The difference being is, if you send it to a person and they approve, that means that the approval ends. But if you send it to a group and the person in the group approves, it will follow the group hierarchical workflow set up in IRRI Quest, and it will go to the next level group and continue until it gets fully approved. Okay, so I'm going to leave it as that. So it's going to a group called finance check. So if I go to my IRRI Quest systems, so basically the person that needs to approve it will get, if I switch back to my machine, will get a email that looks very similar to this. So in our example, it went to Steph, and this is just an old email. It will tell you which invoices you have that are waiting your approval, and then it will have a link. So this link will be on the email, and the person can just click it and it will take them to IRRI Quest, and if they're already logged in, it will take them straight to the invoice screen. If they're not logged in, it will ask them to log in. So I will pretend I'm Steph, and there's my invoice there. If I had an image, I could click that button, but in my case I don't have an image because I haven't scanned anything. But if I had an image, the person will be able to click on that image button, and if it doesn't have an image, it will come up with a message saying it doesn't have an image. So Steph opens up the invoice, and at this point Steph could give it a distribution reference at the bottom if she so wishes. She could add an account or even change the account. You can look at PO details. If this was an invoice entered within the purchase or the receivings entry window and matched to a PO, the approver could check the match details and make sure they're happy with it. In this case, it hasn't got a PO matched. But one thing here, we could add a note. So if we click on note, we go, doesn't matter, so I'm going to put in any kind of note. So I click OK, and then I go back to the invoice detail, and Steph is going to approve that. We don't need to worry about an approval note. We're not rejecting it, so I'll just click OK to that. You can put a note if you want to. It just adds another approval note. So if we were to go to GP again, and we find that invoice that Steph's just approved, so you can see that in GP there's the notes field now has been updated, and you can see the note that Steph has entered through our IRRI Quest application. So this invoice, if we were to look at the IRRI Quest approval, it will tell us now that that's approved. Now, the reason that's approved is because when it came to the finance check, the finance check group has got a sign-off value. So if I show you quickly, so each group you can set to have their own sign-off values as well. So a user can have a sign-off value, but in our case we've said the finance check group, if I scroll all the way to the bottom, can basically complete approval on invoices up to £2,500. So if we go back to GP, we can see the invoice approval. This invoice has been approved. And if we were to look at our smart lists, their invoice approval, so I've got a reminder that sets to my smart list, I can see there now that that invoice there, 489, has been approved. So once it's been approved, as I mentioned before, the invoice will get moved to another batch. So when it does, you can come into the payables batch and post it. Now, there are the rules behind that. Can be, we could tell it to move to a batch by just typing in the word, whatever batch we want to call it. Let's say we want to call it approved, and it will move all invoices to that approved batch. But if we use these mask tokens, as they call it here, we can tell it to go, let's call the new batch number some initials hyphen source batch being the original batch, or you could use a date and it will use a date. So if someone raised an invoice yesterday, put a date on the original batch of yesterday and it got approved today, it will update the new approved batch to today's date. So once those transactions are approved, they will get moved over, as I mentioned, to another batch. In this case, I just happen to have a few test transactions in there today, and they've been moved to the same batch. And once you're happy with that, so you could post it. So in that case, it's telling me that one of the transactions in that batch hasn't been approved yet. So that's where the original issue comes in. If you try and post a transaction and some of them haven't been approved, you can't post it. So GP puts all the transactions that haven't been approved on hold. So if I try and post now, because anything that starts with IA is my approved batches, I could just post it and the usual GP screens come up, and in my case, a lot of them, and it will post the transactions for you. Okay, in my example, I have the move transactions to the approved batch running every half an hour. It runs on an agent. The reason behind that is if you have lots of people using Dynamics at the same time, and if you try and move transactions straight away to another batch, GP throws up an error saying someone's using the batch. I'm not sure if you guys have ever come up with an error saying someone else is using the batch, or if you're trying to post a batch and someone else is in the purchase entry screen. So it runs on a schedule, and every half an hour it will move all the transactions that have been fully approved to my approved batches that start with IA. So anything that starts with IA for me is my approved batches. So coming back to our approval again, so if I raise a transaction for, so if we go for greater than 5,000, I'll just create a new batch. And I'll raise it for 5,000. So again, approval is the same because I've only got one approval set that I wanted to capture. So it will always go to my finance check as a first level. The only difference comes in, so that's been submitted now to Steph. So if Steph logs in, so the difference comes in is when Steph approves, because she can only approve up to 2,500 if you remember. Because this is 5,000, when she approves, it will go to the next level of approval. So if we log out, and within my organization here, the next level of approval is finance manager, and that would be a young lady called Catherine in my example. So if I go to Invoice Approvals, so Catherine logs in, and there she can see the invoice waiting to approve, and again the same screen, you can view the scanned image on the far right, but she'll approve, and Catherine can only approve up to a certain value. I think so. If I just log in as myself, I'll just double check Catherine's value. So Catherine can approve up to 5,000. So that would mean if we go back to GP, that would be approved. So if we look at our approved smart list, and refresh, we can see our last one there for 5,000. If for some reason the approver would like to reject an invoice, a approver can just click on reject, enter the reason why, money, if I could spell that would be great, too much money, click OK, and they can reject that. So if I were to click on my smart lists here, I wanted to see if that, make sure that's rejected. So if I go to purchasing, rejected, so yep, that's gone rejected, and it gives me the reason why it's rejected. So and if we go to our purchasing transaction, and we can see there that it's been rejected, and it's been rejected by me because I'm just happened to be part of the finance check as well as a test, and I thought it was too much money, so that's why I rejected that. So therefore finance could come in and maybe make a change to it, make it less or whatever, click save again, and it's by clicking save again, it will submit it for approval again, and then the approver can check it again and approve it once they are happy with it. Okay, so that's just a quick demonstration on how invoice approval works in Dynamics GP and in conjunction with our web application IRRI Quest. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask now, or alternatively you can contact our sales team at sales@nolanbusinesssolutions.com, and they'll be happy to further the questions to myself, and I'll be happy to answer those and send them back to you as soon as possible if you guys want. I'd like to just thank everyone for attending and watching and being patient with myself, and I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the afternoon. Thank you. Bye.